to create some more content for you. He's talking about some directors he knows. These are the Teenage Film Snob hiatus shows.
Welcome to Us, a Teenage Film Snob. I'm James Chalmers, your friendly neighbourhood film snob. It is another hiatus show. As of now, we're about 10 or 11 deep, and you'll be used to that funky new theme song, but I only created that yesterday, so I'm still getting excited by it. So if it's weird that I'm commenting on it for the first time after months of doing it, that is why. You're listening to everything in real time. I am smashing out as many episodes as I can in a very condensed period of time, so that when I am on hiatus, you guys have plenty to listen to. You know the story. You've been listening along for a while now. This week we're changing it up a little bit, just a tiny bit. Instead of ranking movies this week in the filmographies of a specific director, I wanted to take a moment to shine the light on a bunch of directors. Because as I've been doing this series, and I might have pointed it out recently, there's a gaping hole in these episodes. Every single director I have talked about so far in the last 10 episodes has been a man. And that didn't sit well with me. I felt that I should be talking about filmmakers, not just from all around the world, but from different perspectives of the different genders. And I felt that that was something I could work on. And I'm really disappointed to say that when I went through a list of directors, women who I'm a fan of, none of them have I watched their entire filmography. None of them at all, which was really disappointing. And so I had a couple of options. I could try and just binge watch as much as possible, but given my current schedule, that wasn't going to happen. I could do half rankings, and that didn't feel quite fair either. I didn't like with the Bong Joon-ho episode that I could only talk about half of his films. So instead, what I'm going to do is a celebration of the women in film that I'm a big fan of, with the promise that I'm going to dive further into their filmographies. I think that's the best way to do it. I don't want to avoid talking about women in film. I want to celebrate them because there are some fantastic movies that I want to talk about from some wonderful women who work behind the camera. I just don't have a single director whose entire filmography I've watched, and that's a big problem. You know, that's a big old problem of mine. So I haven't focused on every woman in film, obviously, but I've chosen a few of my favorites. I've chosen about 8 women in film that I really like, and I've chosen 1 or 2 films from each of their filmographies, and I'm going to talk about them today. Again, with the promise that I'm going to do better. And by the time this comes out, hopefully I will have watched a lot of the films that I've missed as well, because I'm going to have a bit more downtime on my hiatus. I'm also going to do the same for Asian cinema and European cinema as well. There are a couple of directors, like I was going to do an episode on Park Chan-wook, and I've only watched about 4 or 5 of his. I want to do an episode of Takashi Miike. That guy's directed 100 films, so I'm not going to be able to focus on his entire filmography either. So what I'll do is in coming episodes, I will do a special on Asian cinema that I like, European cinema that I like, and then obviously with the promise of watching more as well. And that's the thing about being a film fan. You know, you watch as much as you can. I never look at who made the film really until the end of the movie. I just kind of gravitate to what I think looks cool. And it is a very man-driven business. There's way more men behind the camera than women. It is getting better. It is changing. And the way that we can help that change and support that change is by watching more movies directed by women. So that's what I'm going to promise to do. I'm going to keep working on that. But in the meantime today, I can at least shine a light on some of the films that I do really like directed by women. That's a long way of saying that's what we're doing today. So just bear with me. I'm just getting ready to start my list. And there'll be some films in here you'll definitely will have heard of, and there'll be some you haven't heard of, I imagine. And that's always good. You know, we can bring a little bit more attention to some stuff that you haven't seen and hopefully build up your film watching list as well. So what we're going to do is start in the region of France, of course. Start in France and talk about some of my favorite French films from a woman, and then we're going to move around the world. And there's going to be obviously a lot of US and US films. I'm multitasking at the moment, which is why it sounds like I'm distracted, because I am, but that's okay. Okay, starting in France with one of my favourite directors. I thought she'd only directed 2 films, but then when I looked at her list, there was actually 4 or 5, including one that came out this year that I wasn't even aware of. So I'm very excited to finally check that one out. But I'm starting with Julia Ducournau. Julia Ducournau is a French filmmaker. She tends to work more in absurdism and horror. And I first became aware of Julia Ducournau back in 2017 with her film Raw. If you haven't seen Raw, Raw is a film about cannibals. Maybe a very slight spoiler there, but if you look at the poster art, you can kind of put it together on your own. And it follows a young girl in her first year of university, and she's starting to, I guess, discover what being an adult is all about. She starts discovering her own sexuality. She starts discovering new friendships. She's training to be a vet, and she's learning about anatomy. And during this time, she starts to develop this hunger, and she doesn't know what it is. And it's a really interesting film because on one level, it absolutely is a film about cannibalism and literally eating flesh. But on the other hand, it's also a film about discovering your own sexuality. And the hunger is a metaphor, not just for, well, it's not a metaphor at all when it comes to eating flesh, but a metaphor for desire, and learning to kind of fulfill that desire and how to control that desire and how to engage with adults in a mature way. It's a fascinating flick. It's wonderful. The entire cast is excellent. I don't find it particularly scary, but I can imagine some people would. But it is very much a sensory overload at points. There's a sequence in a dance, which is quite loud and overwhelming. And then as the hunger grows and as our main character starts to kind of succumb to her desires, it can be quite a lot for some people. But Raw is fantastic. It was one of my favourite films of 2017. I think it was 2017. Maybe it was 2016. I think it was 2017. It was one of my favourite films of the year. It's definitely one of my favourite French/European films. And maybe one of the best films about cannibalism out there. I think unlike most cannibal films, which tend to push to the extremes, to the extremity of horror, this one has a certain level of class and romance to it that you wouldn't expect from a cannibal film. And I highly encourage everyone to go and check out Raw. If you hear some background noise, there's a storm going on at home as I record. And there's someone doing some dishes I can hear as well. So if you can hear that, I apologize. The other film of Julia Ducournau I want to talk about is her second film, or at least the follow-up to Raw, which is a film called Titan. Titane. And I believe translates roughly to titanium, or is in referral to the metal of high industry vehicles. And this is a bonkers flick. When I heard about this movie, first of all, I was excited because I wanted more Julia Ducournau films. But then when I heard what the film was about, I was like, I need to see this just because it doesn't sound like a real thing. The same way most people respond to something like The Human Centipede or Tusk. This is a body horror film, and it follows a young woman who's quite androgynous. She can kind of pass for male or female, depending on the way she wears her makeup and her hair. And she has a sexual proclivity, let's say, for vehicles, for cars, trucks, automobiles. She has this weird sexual attraction to them. And after one particularly graphic incident, she falls pregnant with a truck's child. That is the setup for the film. It's very graphic. It's very full on. Not only is it graphic in its sexual nature, but there's a lot of violence and gore and body horror, as I mentioned as well, particularly at the end. I will spoil it for you because most people are going to steer clear of this one anyway. There is a birth scene. Yes, there is a birth scene, and it is pretty full on. The rest of the film is a really interesting mystery. It kind of goes in a bunch of different directions. In order to avoid being persecuted, our main character disguises herself as a young man. There was a boy who went missing 20 years prior, and she disguises herself as him because she feels she can kind of look like a grown-up version of him, and then ends up living with his dad. It's a weird flick. It's really bizarre. But there ain't nothing else like it. And for that reason alone, I think you need to give Titane a go. Titane's definitely going to be the harder of the two. I would start with Raw and see how you go after that. But if you like Raw and you want to kind of push it to the limit, Julia Ducournau's Titane is a wild ride. No pun intended. So that's my first director. I think she's wonderful. She has a new film out this year, apparently. I haven't had a chance to check it out yet, but I am a Ducournau fan for life. Raw left such an impression on me. I can't wait to see what she does next. The next director I'm going to talk about is from South Korea, and she's only directed a handful of films. I've only seen the one by hers, but it was such an impactful film that I wanted to talk about it briefly. It was in the news a lot about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, because it got nominated for a bunch of awards. I'm talking about director Celine Song. She did The Materialists this year, which I still haven't seen, but her previous film was Past Lives. And Past Lives is a fantastic film, a beautiful film, a film about love, a film about choice, a film about regret and looking back and how to move forward, and basically follows the lives of these two children, who at school they were friendly, and they kind of maybe dated a little bit as they got older, but then due to certain circumstances, she went to America and he stayed in Korea, and then they start to reconnect using Zoom or Skype or one of the online chat things. And when they finally reconnect, he finds out that she's married to an American man, and they want to get together. And it's this wonderful story of romance, but also accepting the hand you've been dealt. Like, he's very much in love with her still. She's in love with him, but she has a life now. And her husband is the most loving, patient husband on earth, because he's very cool with her going out with him and having drinks with him and reconnecting, and even like kind of questions their past relationship, but not in a disrespectful or interrogative way, just wants to learn more about it. It's a really sweet film that will definitely make you cry, because it definitely tugs on your heartstrings. It's incredible. It definitely deserved the awards and the nominations, and I'm glad that more international cinema is being recognised by the Academy Awards. So Past Lives is wonderful. It's been a minute since I've seen it. I think I watched it about 12 months ago while I was overseas. I bought it on Blu-ray. But I really enjoyed the experience. I don't have much more to say on Celine Song, but that film really stayed with me, and I thought she was fantastic. And for that reason alone, I do want to check out The Materialists, but I'll just have to wait until it comes out on physical media in the next couple of months, and then I'll be able to give my review. So stay tuned for that. Third up, I've got another director from Asia. This director is from China. Her name is Lulu Wang, and she directed an incredible film that I also watched for the first time last year called The Farewell. The Farewell's from, I want to say, around 2018. It stars Awkwafina in the lead role, who plays a Chinese-American girl. She was born in China, but then moved to America and has lived in America most of her adult life. And gets a call one day that her grandmother is dying. And there's this, it's a really interesting study of culture and how death is approached depending on whereabouts from the world you are. Because in the Western civilization, if someone is sick and is on the decline, our immediate kind of knee-jerk reaction is, let's get them to the hospital, let's make... if that's been the last of their life in hospital, at least, we're doing everything to get the most care to them and try and cure this disease and help them out. But in China, at least through the prism of this film, they don't tell her that she's dying. The whole idea is that the family mourns in silence, and they let grandma live on as if everything's okay, because the idea of knowing you're in a decline and you're dying would be too distressing. So it's this really interesting film about how she's been living in America for so long, so she now has this kind of American approach or Western approach to how we deal with death. And she really struggles to assimilate with her family, because her whole family is just like, yep, this is business as usual. We're not saying anything. We're having a great time. We're celebrating a wedding and all this sort of thing. And she doesn't know she's dying, whereas Awkwafina really has to struggle to keep it under wraps, because she's so used to the way that we approach death in the Western world. And it's just beautiful and tragic film, and just tells a wonderful story, and is a really interesting commentary on life and death and how we kind of approach our own mortality. I don't know if Lulu Wang has directed anything else. That's definitely the only thing of hers I've seen. But I would 100% recommend checking out The Farewell. But bring some tissues, because boy, is it a sad flick, but also very lovely and charming, and a beautiful story. We're now going to jump continents. We're going to head to America for a little bit, and we're going to talk about 3 more directors, and then we're going to jump around a few more places. So my first American director I want to talk about is Greta Gerwig. Greta Gerwig has spent most of her career in front of the screen as an actress, as she spent some time writing, but over the last decade has started working behind the camera. She has 3 films in particular that people are aware of. Little Women, which I've only seen once, was a long time ago, and I don't feel confident enough to talk about that flick, but I did enjoy it. But just don't feel knowledgeable enough to talk about it accurately. She also directed Barbie, which was a smash hit and a $1 billion box office and stuff like that. And we'll talk about that in a second. And she also directed Lady Bird, which was nominated for Academy Award. Lady Bird starred Laurie Metcalf. My accent doesn't allow for the pronunciation of Laurie's surname, so I apologize to Laurie. And also starring Saoirse Ronan. Isn't it funny? I could pronounce the Irish name, but I struggled with the American one. There we go. And Saoirse Ronan plays a young girl who's about to finish high school. She's going through a bit of an identity crisis and a bit of a rebrand. She's heading out to college soon. And she, like many people who are towards the end of high school, isn't quite sure who she is and what she wants to be, and is in the process of forming a new identity. She no longer wants to go by her birth name. She wants to go by the name Lady Bird. She starts hanging out with dangerous boys, one of which played by Timothée Chalamet. She's starting to experiment with her own sexuality, and has a real potty mouth as well, actually, young Lady Bird. It's a coming-of-age film. It's very raw and real. I've only seen it the one time. When I came out of it, I wasn't a huge fan. This was in my snobby days, of course, and I really struggled with it. But upon reflection, every time I think about the film, I do remember it fondly. I've got it in my collection. It's due for a rewatch. But Lady Bird is a fantastic film, a fantastic coming-of-age story, and I thought Greta Gerwig did a fantastic job with it. Jumping across to Barbie. Barbie is an incredible film. It's way better than it had any right to be. I think we all assumed when they announced there was a Barbie movie being made that it was going to be a toy movie, maybe an animated film or a very kind of silly film based on a product, the way most toy films. If you think about the Transformers films, I think we kind of thought maybe a Barbie version of that. But it's very self-aware. It's making a lot of feminist commentary, which is fantastic. It's doing a lot of heavy lifting without saying it in the dialogue. Margot Robbie playing the titular role of Barbie. Ryan Gosling as Ken. I mean, if you listen to this episode, chances are you've seen Barbie. Like, everyone saw Barbie. But one of my favorite moments in this film, and it was incredible. And it was a really great choice by Greta Gerwig, and I think the whole identity and kind of philosophy of the film can be summed up in one scene which has next to no dialogue. And Barbie gets to Barbie headquarters, and she goes up to the top floor, and she's going into the boardroom, and she just opens the door, and the boardroom is full of men, and there's not a single woman in there. And that, I think, speaks far more volumes than any of the speeches. And, there's some great speeches. America Ferrera has a wonderful speech about being a mum, and being a working woman, and, the pressures of being a modern woman. And it's a beautiful, brilliant speech. But I think just opening the doors into that boardroom speaks volumes about kind of the way women are treated and how decisions are made that affect women in the present day. It's an incredible film. Really, really well done. Really funny, really tongue-in-cheek. It's a great satire, but also has a lot to say. So Greta Gerwig, a fantastic director to look out for. If you haven't been watching her films already, which I'm sure, if you haven't seen Little Women, if you haven't seen Lady Bird, you've almost definitely seen Barbie. But I would encourage you to go back to the rest of her films as well. My next US director that I want to talk about is Amy Heckerling. Amy Heckerling is a name that if you're a little bit older, you're probably familiar with. If you're not, I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. Amy Heckerling is a really interesting one because of all the filmmakers I'm talking about today. The films that she's directed are the only ones... actually, I was going to say the only ones that don't have female leads, but the one that I like the best absolutely does have a female lead. It's more of an ensemble cast. She did direct Clueless, which is a film that I still haven't seen. Don't tell anyone, sorry. I do need to get to Clueless. I will watch it one day. I just haven't watched it yet. But the two Amy Heckerling films I want to talk about, the first one is a National Lampoon comedy called European Vacation. It's the sequel to the original film Vacation, starring Chevy Chase, Beverly D'Angelo, and it's just another adventure of the Griswolds. This time they're in Europe and they're navigating the wacky ways of Europe that Americans don't seem to be used to. They get stuck on roundabouts and meet topless women and all the kind of comedy tropes you would expect from a National Lampoon film. And it's really funny. But the most important film, I think, in Amy Heckerling's filmography, and granted I haven't seen everything and she has done a lot of TV as well, but the one that's most important to me and is one of my favourite films of all time is Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Fast Times at Ridgemont High is the proto-teen sex comedy. Before American Pie, before Road Trip, before any of that, you have Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And Fast Times at Ridgemont High is a really interesting film because you've got a young girl played by Jennifer Jason Leigh who's looking to lose her virginity. She's exploring herself sexually and during the course of the film falls pregnant and then needs to undergo an abortion. So there's that element. You've also got Phoebe Cates, who I would say is like an 80s teen heartthrob or it girl for boys in the 80s. I talked about recently, I reviewed American Pie. I watched it for the first time in years. And Shannon Elizabeth in American Pie was for boys in the 90s what Phoebe Cates was for boys in the 80s. It's a really sweet film, but it's grounded in reality. Like, yes, it's funny. Yes, it's raunchy, but it has real world consequences. And you do see that with things like the idea of disease and pregnancy and abortion and stuff like that. But it's also really funny. It's a perfectly balanced film. You've got a young Sean Penn playing Spicoli, which is maybe the most lighthearted Sean Penn has ever been in his life, but he's a really great character. You've got, I was going to say Cole Hauser, but it's not Cole Hauser, it's the other guy, and I'm blanking on his name right now. Judge Reinhold, as an older teenage boy who has a job managing a fast food restaurant, and he gets caught doing something very inappropriate in a bathroom. It's a great flick. I talked about Fast Times much more eloquently earlier in the run of the show when we were talking about our favourite 80s films, because Fast Times is one of my favourite 80s films. But if you haven't checked it out, it's an incredible flick. I would absolutely recommend anyone watch this film. Once you're 15. Yeah, I wouldn't say any earlier than 15, but once you're 15, definitely check out Fast Times. It's a fantastic movie. It's really funny, but also just a really great coming-of-age story. And kudos to someone like Amy Heckerling being the one behind the wheel, because when I first saw it, if you asked me, I would have guaranteed it was directed by a man. But if you watch it and you watch the way the women are written and the way the female characters kind of navigate this world and how they handle their problems, only a woman could have directed this film. And it's an incredible, incredible achievement. Next up, we're going to go into a little bit more of a mainstream tentpole filmmaker. Her first film was independent, but got a lot of awards buzz. And then her follow-up film, 10 years later, was one of the biggest films of the year, maybe the decade. I'm talking about Patty Jenkins. She's a wonderful American filmmaker. Her first film that kind of gained her some attention was Monster, which came out, I want to say, in 2003. It was really got a lot of traction because it stars Charlize Theron, who had just kind of exploded on the scene at the time. Charlize Theron, you know, if you look back at the magazines of the 2000s, it was every magazine was ranking actors and actresses by their attractiveness. And Charlize Theron was, the most beautiful woman in the world. That's what they were saying. And then they released the makeup kind of application for the film Monster, and they turned this beautiful woman into Eileen Wuornos, who's one of the few notorious female serial killers in America. And this flick tells the story of Eileen, from being a woman, a married woman who gets abused and attacked, and then how she takes revenge and starts becoming a man killer, basically. Christina Ricci is also in the role. If I remember correctly, she plays Eileen's lover, and maybe even an accomplice, if I remember correctly. It's been a minute since I've watched Monster, but Monster's an incredible film, really dark, really upsetting and unsettling. Fantastic performances across the board, and expertly directed by Patty Jenkins. Just a wonderfully well-made film, but not for those with a weak stomach. 10 years later, Patty Jenkins would come back and direct one of the biggest films of the year, if not the decade, because she helmed 2017's Wonder Woman, starring Gal Gadot. And Wonder Woman came out at a time when Warner Brothers was having a little bit of trouble with their DC universe. I've gone on record multiple times. I just did a Zack Snyder episode not too long ago. I've gone on record saying that I enjoy the DCEU and what they were doing. I love Man of Steel, really like Batman v Superman. Even Suicide Squad gets a lot of hate, and it's not a perfect film, and there's a lot of studio interference, but there is some fun to be had. I'd be fascinated by seeing the director's cut if they ever decide to release it. But Wonder Woman firmly planted its feet on the ground and let people know what to expect from Warner Brothers and DC moving forward, and tonally probably best represented the characters they were trying to tell us. Man of Steel was accused of being too dark. Batman v Superman had that same critique. It was too dark. Like, yes, Batman's supposed to be, but Superman isn't. Suicide Squad was also, accused of having an interesting tone. The Suicide Squad probably should have been darker and more violent and less comedic and pop music-y. But Wonder Woman comes out and she's a figure of hope. And she's a figure of love and support and embrace and represents women. And that film does all of that and makes her a strong woman, but also makes her very feminine because, in films, whenever you have a strong woman, the idea is that you need to make her more butch, for lack of a better term. You need to make her more of a guy's girl. And Wonder Woman isn't that. She can hold her own with the boys, but she's also one of the girls. And Patty Jenkins just did a fantastic job. The casting of the film, obviously Gal Gadot was cast by Zack Snyder previously, but bringing in Connie Nielsen as Hippolyta, bringing in Chris Pine as Steve Trevor, bringing in so many wonderful actors, and it's a triumph. The first two acts in particular. The third act is a bit of a CGI mess, but it's not terrible. It's totally watchable. But them going through Germany, going through the different cities and trying to protect the people while also fighting. It wasn't Nazis because World War One, but the German oppressors, going through no man's land. That battlefield that they couldn't get an inch on, the soldiers were stuck and they couldn't make any advancement. Then she just walks through with her shield up. Incredible. Wonder Woman is a triumph and is a wonderful, excellent superhero film, and a really great feminist film as well. I love Wonder Woman. We're going to hop back over to Asia for a moment, and then we'll finish the director's list in America. We've been going for a pretty long time, going about half an hour at this stage, so probably takes around 40-45 minutes to wrap everything up, I imagine. So going back to China, I wish I'd seen more of this director's films. I know she had a critically acclaimed film that was, I think, even won Best Picture, and I still haven't seen it, and that's on me. But I have seen one of her films, and the film is incredibly underrated. It's a visual treat. It's an excellent film, so I do want to talk about it a little bit. The director, originally born in China, has started doing some American films now, is a woman by the name of Chloe Zhao. So she directed Nomadland back in the early 2020s. It was released during COVID time, which is why I probably didn't see it, and just haven't got around to it yet, but I absolutely will watch Nomadland as soon as I get a chance. following the Oscar win and all the buzz around it, she was offered a deal with Marvel and directed a very divisive film called The Eternals. The Eternals, based on a Jack Kirby property, very cosmic and spacey and wacky and out there. And we didn't quite see that version. This was a much more serious, stripped-back film. It didn't have all the wackiness of Jack Kirby that you would expect. But unlike Fantastic Four this year, which is a lot closer to what Jack Kirby's work was. But what we did see instead was a film that used the world around us to tell the story. There was obviously some green screen, but far less green screen than the average Marvel film. Chloe Zhao took the actors out into the real world, shot them in front of these beautiful landscapes. The cast of this flick is incredible. Salma Hayek, Richard Madden, Kumail Nanjiani is excellent in the film. I've forgotten the name of the actress who plays Makari, but Makari might be not only my favourite character from that film, definitely one of my favourite characters from this new phase, and maybe one of my favourite speedsters. I've always been a Flash guy, but Makari comes pretty close. The way they do her running in the movie is excellent. We also got Barry Keoghan. I can never pronounce his last name, but the guy from Saltwater, and he played Joker in The Batman, and he's done a bunch of stuff. He's a wonderful actor as well. The Eternals is incredibly underrated. It's not fast-paced action beats, punchlines, the way most Marvel films are. Marvel has a formula, and they execute that formula very well most of the time. This isn't that. This almost felt like Marvel doing a DC film, you know, going more grounded, going more serious, taking its time. I remember talking to my brother-in-law, David, who's been on the podcast before, and he said that he thinks Eternals is the kind of film that didn't perform particularly well, but over time will be considered one of the great cult films of the franchise. You know, kind of didn't get a lot of positive attention at the time, and then will find its audience later. And I tend to agree, because every time I watch it, I'm just enraptured with this beautiful film. It looks incredible. It sounds incredible. There's a lot of new characters, and I think they're handled pretty well. And it's not just a lot of characters. It's a lot of characters over centuries. They're telling a timeless story. And they're dealing with celestials and stuff like that. So, which are those really big creatures who are larger than planets and stuff like that. I really enjoyed Eternals. The first time I watched it, I wasn't quite sure, but with every viewing, I enjoy it more and more. And Chloe Zhao did a wonderful job. It seems like both she and the cast have been dealt a bit of a negative hand here, because it doesn't seem they're planning on doing anything more with those characters. We don't know if they're going to show up in Doomsday or Secret Wars. We don't know if they're ever going to get a sequel. And I think that's a real shame, because I think it's a really wonderful film, and Chloe Zhao is an excellent filmmaker, and I cannot wait to watch Nomadland. Going back to America, very briefly, another director who hasn't made a ton of films, spends a lot more time in front of the camera or voice acting. She's the voice actress for Poison Ivy in the Harley Quinn animated series, which is one of my favourite performances of all time. I'm talking about a filmmaker named Lake Bell. And the reason I'm talking about Lake Bell is that she directed a wonderful film about 10-15 years ago called Inner World. And it's the story of what it's like to be a woman in the world of voice acting. Voice acting, especially voiceover work for film trailers and stuff like that, is a heavily male-dominated industry. If you watch commercials, if you watch trailers and there's a voice, a lot of the time, if they want to exude power, if they want to exude tension, they almost always go to a male voice. And Lake Bell is a voice actress. She's done not only performances in TV shows and movies, but also for advertisements and stuff as well. And I believe this film was drawing from real life, from her real experience. And so because of that, she made a film about what it's like to be. And it's a heartbreaking film. She's in competition with her father, who's a famous voice actor. She's trying to get a gig where she does the voiceover announcement for a brand new video game. Again, an industry that is heavily male-dominated. It's a comedy, but it's also full of drama and emotion. And she not only did she direct it, but she also plays the lead. And it's absolutely fantastic. So if you get a chance to watch Inner World, I 100% recommend you go check it out. Also, just check out Lake Bell in everything she does, because she's wonderful, and I don't hear people talk about her anywhere near enough. She's amazing. And that's going to bring me to my final director of the series. Again, I've only seen a handful of each of these filmmakers' films, and I'm going to do better, as I said. I'm going to finish with a Canadian filmmaker who I haven't met personally, but I have chatted with quite a bit on Instagram, because she sent me a screener for her latest film. Now, she co-directed this film. She's made 3 films in the last 3 years. I've only seen this latest one, and she co-directed it with a man named Matthew Campagna. Her name is Melissa D'Agostino, and the film she directed is a movie called Paige Darcy, Reluctant Detective. And when I saw this film, I reviewed it, and I've listed as maybe the biggest dark horse of the year. I think it's the surprise hit of the year. I hope more people get to see it. It's currently on Highball TV, which is a Canadian streaming service, but it's available worldwide. And Paige Darcy, Reluctant Detective, is kind of like a Scooby-Doo film, kind of like a Harriet the Spy film, kind of like, I've forgotten the name of the girl, Nancy Drew. But if that character grew up and lost control of their life and was a total mess. It was also written by Alice Moran, who's hasn't directed a film to the best of my knowledge. But again, another strong female voice telling interesting stories. And it is just this wonderful, funny, action-packed mystery that tells a very, very human story. Paige Darcy, Reluctant Detective, I've reviewed, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I would definitely recommend trying to watch it if you can. It is available on DVD in Canada, which I believe they're shipping internationally. I haven't got mine yet, but it's also a really wonderful film. So there's a few directors for you, women behind the camera. I'll list them all again in a second. And if you haven't, I'm sure you've seen a couple of these films. I think most of you will probably have seen Barbie or Wonder Woman. They're obviously quite big films. The rest may be a little bit lesser known. So again, those women who I definitely encourage you to check out their work. Julia Ducournau from France. From South Korea, we've got Celine Song. From China, we've got Lulu Wang and Chloe Zhao. From the US, Greta Gerwig, Amy Heckerling, Patty Jenkins, and Lake Bell. And then from Canada, Melissa D'Agostino. So that is my very brief look at women behind the camera, women in film. If there's any, there's definitely some big ones I missed, but just because I hadn't seen a lot of their films and I haven't necessarily connected with them as artists, I want to talk about the films that I feel comfortable discussing. So even, I mentioned a couple of films that I hadn't seen, so I wouldn't go into too much detail here. There are other directors that I know, big time ones that I missed, but I just haven't seen enough of their work to celebrate it. But go and check them out. We'll probably go back to a regular director. We'll go back to a director ranking. Sorry, that was a real faux pas. We'll go back to director rankings next week. So I'll find another director that I like and just focus on their filmography. But I am going to do another episode like this for the films of Asia and films of Europe as well. So stay tuned. I'll go into more detail there. We might find some crossover as well. We'll see how we go. But thank you all for listening. Go check out the rest of the episodes. You can find us on all the socials, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all that sort of stuff. And I'll be back soon with more. But until then, as we say on this podcast every week, guys, I was a teenage film snub, but I'm trying to be better. I'll see you next week.